The night was thick with an eerie stillness, the kind that makes your skin crawl even before anything happens. Tina had been driving for hours, her eyes heavy, her mind foggy from the endless stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. The radio had long since faded into static, and the only sound was the hum of her car's engine and the occasional whoosh of passing headlights. She was alone, and the isolation was starting to weigh on her. The kind of isolation that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. She had been traveling to visit her sister in a small town a few states over. It was a trip she had made before, but never this late at night. The darkness outside her windows felt oppressive, like it was pressing in on her from all sides. Her GPS had stopped working about an hour ago, and she was relying on memory and the occasional road sign to guide her. Her phone had no service, and the map she had printed out was crumpled on the passenger seat, barely legible under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Tina's eyelids were drooping, and she knew she couldn't keep going like this. She needed a break, even if it was just for a few minutes. Up ahead, she saw the faint glow of a gas station sign, its fluorescent light flickering like a dying firefly. Relief washed over her as she pulled into the nearly empty lot. The gas station was small, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The windows were fogged, and the neon sign above the door buzzed faintly. A single car was parked near the entrance, but there was no one in sight. Tina pulled up to the pump, her hands trembling slightly as she turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. She stepped out of the car, the cool night air biting at her skin. The gas station was surrounded by dense woods, the trees looming like silent sentinels. She glanced around, her unease growing. Something felt off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them, or the way the wind whispered through the trees like a warning. She filled up her tank, the sound of the gas pumping loud in the stillness. As she replaced the nozzle, she noticed the attendant inside the station. He was an older man, his face partially hidden by the brim of a worn-out baseball cap. He didn't look up as she approached the door, his attention focused on something behind the counter. Tina hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open, the bell above it jingling softly. The inside of the gas station was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The shelves were stocked with dusty cans and bags of chips, and the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and motor oil. Tina grabbed a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels, her eyes darting around the small space. The attendant still hadn't looked up, and she felt a pang of unease. She cleared her throat, and he finally glanced at her, his eyes cold and distant. "Just these," she said, placing the items on the counter. He nodded silently, ringing her up without a word. Tina handed him a few bills, her hand shaking slightly. He took the money, his fingers brushing against hers, and she flinched. His skin was ice cold, and she quickly pulled her hand back, stuffing the change into her pocket. She grabbed her items and hurried out the door, the bell jingling again as it closed behind her. Back in her car, Tina locked the doors and let out a shaky breath. She glanced at the gas station, the windows now dark. The attendant was nowhere to be seen. She shook her head, trying to dispel the unease that had settled over her. She was just tired, that was all. She needed to rest, even if it was just for a few minutes. Tina reclined her seat slightly, closing her eyes. The sound of the wind outside was soothing, and she felt herself drifting off. But just as she was about to fall asleep, she heard a faint noise. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make her eyes snap open. She sat up, her heart pounding. The sound came again, a faint scratching like nails against glass. She looked around, her breath catching in her throat. The gas station was completely dark now, the neon sign above the door flickering out. The only light came from the moon, casting an eerie glow over the empty lot. Tina's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and she froze. There was something there, just at the edge of the woods, a figure standing perfectly still, watching her. Her heart raced as she fumbled for the keys, her hands trembling. She turned the ignition, the engine roaring to life. She pressed the gas pedal, but the car didn't move. Panic surged through her as she realized all 4 tires were flat. She looked back at the figure, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. It was closer now, and she could see the glint of something in its hand. A chainsaw. Tina's mind raced as she tried to think of what to do. She couldn't stay in the car, but the thought of getting out and running into the woods was terrifying. The figure was moving closer, the chainsaw now raised, its engine roaring to life. The sound was deafening, and Tina's instincts kicked in. She threw open the car door and bolted, her feet pounding against the asphalt as she ran towards the woods. The trees loomed ahead, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. Tina plunged into the darkness, the sound of the chainsaw growing louder behind her. She could hear the man's heavy footsteps, his breathing ragged as he chased her. She didn't look back, her heart pounding in her chest as she ran deeper into the woods. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks tripping her as she went. Branches clawed at her face and arms, but she didn't stop. She could hear the man gaining on her, his laughter echoing through the trees. It was a cold, cruel sound that sent chills down her spine. She sobbed as she ran, her legs burning with the effort. Up ahead, she saw a small clearing, the moonlight filtering through the trees. She sprinted towards it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But as she reached the edge of the clearing, she froze. There was another figure there, standing in the shadows. Tina's heart sank as she realized she was trapped. The man with the chainsaw was behind her, and now there was someone in front of her. She turned, her eyes darting around for any way out. The man with the chainsaw was closer now, his face twisted into a grotesque smile. Tina backed away, her feet stumbling over the uneven ground. She could feel the tears streaming down her face, her body trembling with fear. But then, something unexpected happened. The figure in the shadows stepped forward, and Tina realized it was a woman. She was older, her face lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and focused. She held a shotgun in her hands, the barrel pointed at the man with the chainsaw. "Get behind me," the woman said, her voice steady. Tina didn't hesitate. She ran to the woman, her legs giving out as she collapsed behind her. The man with the chainsaw stopped, his smile faltering as he looked at the woman. For a moment there was silence, the only sound the distant hum of the chainsaw. "You don't want to do this," the woman said, her voice calm but firm. The man hesitated, his eyes darting between the woman and Tina. Then, with a growl, he turned and disappeared into the woods, the sound of the chainsaw fading into the distance. Tina sobbed, her body shaking with relief. The woman lowered the shotgun, turning to look at her. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Tina shook her head, unable to speak. The woman helped her to her feet, her grip strong and reassuring. "Come on," she said. "Let's get you out of here." Tina followed the woman through the woods, her mind still reeling from what had just happened. They emerged onto a dirt road where an old pickup truck was parked. The woman helped Tina into the passenger seat, then climbed into the driver's side. As they drove away, Tina glanced back at the woods, her heart still pounding. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the man with the chainsaw was still out there, waiting. But for now, she was safe. And as the woman drove her to safety, Tina couldn't help but wonder who she was and why she had been there in the woods that night. But those were questions for another time. For now, all Tina could do was hold on to the feeling of relief and try to forget the terror that had gripped her just moments before. If you enjoyed this terrifying journey into the unknown, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will haunt your dreams. Remember, the night holds secrets that should never be uncovered, and sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we can't see. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your lights on, and never stop running, because the darkness is always closer than you think.